Hey everybody. So I am not a morning person. I struggle with my mood and my energy levels in the winter. And want to kind of throw you back to goodness about 4 or 5 years ago now. It was a cold December morning and I remember waking up and I was not feeling well. I was sick, my head was hurting, my throat was hurting. I was just exhausted and this was early December. It was a Monday morning when this happened and I just chalked it up to the fact that I had been traveling that weekend and I'd been out and about in the world and so wasn't necessarily, hadn't slept as well as I should have. And so that Monday I was like, all right, I'll just suck it up, have some coffee, power through and go into work. Well, Tuesday rolls around and I'm still not feeling any better. I'm actually feeling worse. I'm starting to run a fever. So I figure I'll take a sick day. So I text my manager and I tell him I'm going to call off sick. And it turned out that that sick day turned into a day where I wound up laying on my couch wrapped in a blanket. I had my laptop on my lap and I was just being bombarded with notifications and messages and people who needed me to do things at work. And at the time, I was a technical recruiter. We were staffing for a really large project for a consulting company, and I was the only recruiter there. So the next day, I figured, well, I'm just going to have to go to work sick and power through, and wound up just making myself worse and worse. And through that entire month of December, I wound up trying to go to work when I wasn't feeling well or, working from home and just didn't take the time and the effort to rest my body. And this all resulted in me coming to a conference in early January. I was scheduled to teach a 4-hour workshop. And I had abandoned my health so much that I wound up taking, excuse me, I wound up taking antibiotics, a heavy dose of steroids, all this stuff, lost my voice, and was just hoping to get that all back in time to give this 4-hour workshop at a large conference. The other thing that stands out to me about that December is that we had a holiday party here in Columbus, Ohio, where I live. And at that holiday party, we wound up having a whole bunch of different user groups and meetups came together. It's the one time of year that we all do this. And so everybody who worked in the industry in my local community felt like we had to be there. And normally you go to a party and you think it's going to be a good time, right? Like you're going to be dancing and drinking and listening to music. But that's not what sticks out to me about that party. What sticks out to me about that party is that over half of the conversations I had, people were talking about how tired they were, how sick they were, how they were just burnt out. And yet we were all at this party because we felt like we needed to be, even though we were tired and not feeling well. And this is really interesting to think about now as we're in a pandemic and we think about the fact that now the minute you have the start of a fever or a cough, you stay home so you don't risk infecting other people in case you have COVID. So it's been interesting to see how these stories and how our health evolves and affects us. So for me, myself, I think about health a lot. I've supported people through a lot of health issues. And I remember going to that party and going through that entire month of December and seeing how many people were sacrificing their physical and their mental health. And it made me want to change. So January rolls around, and what does everybody do in January? We make New Year's resolutions. We decide that we're going to be better, that we're going to lose weight, we're going to take care of ourselves. And I vowed to make a change and take better care of myself. And I also wanted to start helping others know that it's okay to discuss health issues and take care of themselves as well. And kind of the goal of this talk today is just to bring health issues into the open. So, like I said, I went into the new year resolving to take better care of myself. And we all know that that's easier said than done. So I find myself one morning in January, again, winter, I'm struggling with a lot of different things. And I am getting this constant bombardment of texts and emails and people needing stuff from me. And I'm chugging coffee after a crappy night of sleep on a great day. I'm getting just nonstop texts and phone calls, Slack badge notifications, Outlook notifications. People are asking me for reports, for updates, for assistance. Everybody needed something from me, but I couldn't get anything done because I was so tired, I was so distracted, I was overwhelmed, I was stressed, and I was just anxious. And so in a fit of, I guess, frustration, I texted a friend who also worked for a different consulting company and had the following exchange. So he'd said his day was stressful, and I said that I was going to quit my job and go be a hermit. I'm in a rare moment of people exhausting me. And he, made a joke about how hermits not paying well. And I said, but no one would need emotional support, paperwork, information, or tasks from me. Now, the reason that this was a big deal is that I'm an extrovert. I literally gain my energy and my motivation from being around other people. I love nothing more than talking to people, whether it's in person, whether it's over lunch, whether it's on a Zoom call, whatever. I love talking to and being around people. And so when I reached a point where I was so exhausted and so annoyed and so fed up that I didn't want to be around people, I realized that something was seriously wrong. So what happened? What led me to send that frantic text? Well, living a pretty sedentary lifestyle, right? Like you work in tech, you're sitting at your desk 8 hours a day, not really moving a whole lot. And because I'd been so busy, I'd sacrificed kind of an exercise routine I'd had. My calendar was just way too full. I was trying to do my work. I was trying to plan a tech conference that I run. I was trying to write a talk. I was trying to take care of my day job and keep time for my hobbies and my friends. We were in the midst of a big hiring push and staffing for a project, and I was supporting a couple colleagues through some health issues, and so it was just a very stressful environment. And I didn't have any time for myself. My diet was a diet of user group pizza, happy hour appetizers, eating whatever I could at my desk. And I'm sure this sounds familiar because that's how it is in tech. Like so often we'll just spend time, grabbing a pizza and pop or whatever for lunch so we can go from thing to thing and we don't take time to stop and care about ourselves. So before we go any further, I want to take some time to tell you about me. I am Cassandra Faris. I am the tech community manager at Rocket Tech, which is a subsidiary of Quicken Loans in Detroit, Michigan. I live in Columbus, Ohio, in the Midwest section of the United States. I was a technical recruiter by trade. I'm now a community manager. And the stuff I'm going to talk about resonates not only because of people around me, but because I myself struggle with some mental health issues. I have anxiety disorder, depression, and ADHD. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about today is going to draw through my own experiences, handling those things at work, and hopefully in the end, helping people learn that you can have mental illnesses and you can have neurodiversities and you can still be successful if you know how to talk about that stuff. So the goal of this talk is to help remove some of that stigma. And I think about a lot how in technology, we keep ourselves so busy all the time. And I argue that we should not sacrifice our health and our happiness for our work and money and winning in the industry. Like there's nothing wrong with being passionate about our work. There's nothing wrong with occasional long hours. We all have those times. But if you find yourself in a situation where you're chronically canceling doctor's appointments and, skipping workouts and making less healthy food choices consistently, you start to decline and you start to go downhill. And I'm a firm believer that we as technical professionals, if we don't talk about, prioritize, and focus on our health, we'll never be able to resolve them. We'll become an increasingly unhealthy industry, and not taking care of ourselves ultimately leads to burnout. In the current pandemic, I think it's especially important to think about these things because so much of our life has changed. The last time I gave this talk, it was January 2020, and I was on a boat in Antarctic waters speaking at a conference called Antarcticonf. And I look back and think about how different the world was and how different this story was a year ago until now. So I want to be updating some of the things that we're talking about to talk about helping handle our mental and physical health in a pandemic. Also want to let you know I'm not a doctor. I dropped out of law school after a year, so everything that I'm talking about is coming from my research and a lot of just my firsthand experience. So like I said, we should not sacrifice our health and our happiness and our well-being for the sake of success in our careers. In addition, when we don't take care of ourselves, it actually impacts us at a number of high ways. We physically gain weight. I mean, you've heard, the jokes about the COVID-19 pounds that people are gaining. We lower our immunity because we're not taking care of ourselves. We're not getting adequate rest. You wind up with some aches and pains from just sitting hunched over a computer all day. And ultimately, a lot of times that leads to missed work, which makes you less productive in the office and let down your teammates. The mental impacts of unhealthy habits, you get this sense of hopelessness, stress, shutting down, destructive acts. I know there's been, weeks and months, especially in the past year, where there's been times that I just have wanted to just give up on everything and just go hide because of how stressful everything is in the world. And I've had to relearn how to take care of myself and prioritize my own mental health. And I found that when I'm taking care of my physical and my mental health, that I actually perform better at work. I am better able to take care of my family, my partner, my friends. I have a better time managing relationships if I'm taking care of myself. So the other scary thing about not taking care of ourselves is that neglecting your physical health can actually cause chronic diseases. So the US National Center for Health Statistics defines a chronic disease as one that lasts for 3 months or more. Examples include things like cancer, type 2 diabetes, and heart disease. And according to the US Center for Disease Control, 70% of deaths are due to chronic disease. 86% of US national healthcare costs are due to chronic disease. And chronic diseases are actually some of the most preventable if we make the correct lifestyle choices. Also, neglecting your health doesn't just make you feel miserable, it actually impacts the rest of your team. I know for a fact that when I went to work for a full month, just completely sick, I know I dropped balls, I know I forgot to do things, I know that I was not as productive or as reliable of a team member as I could be because I was either like hopped up on cold meds or just too tired and unable to focus. And you always see that thing, especially on a team, where if one person is, maybe feeling less good or has lower morale, that can actually spread to the rest of the team. So if you're viewed as somebody who isn't being as productive and who brings morale down, it actually impacts your career growth as a person. So your physical health not only matters for yourself, but it also matters for your career and your team. We can improve physical health in a few different ways, one of which is drinking water, which I just did. But when we talk about improving physical health, a lot of times people want to focus on weight gain and weight loss, and that's not necessarily what we're talking about here. The main things to focus on to improve your physical health are food, exercise, and sleep. Consistently making an effort to eat better food, to be more active, and to get more sleep is the best thing we can do for our health. And the cool thing is this doesn't have to be a big action. You don't have to train for a marathon. You don't have to go gluten-free, vegan, whatever. You can just make small, consistent daily decisions. And especially in the time that we're in, I think it's important to be gentle with ourselves and make small decisions and small changes. And I'll talk about some of those that I've managed to implement. First, let's talk about food. I've always loved this quote. It says, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. So nothing annoys me more than food being labeled as good or evil, and marketers are particularly guilty of this. They'll talk about a guilt-free ice cream or a sinful chocolate cake. And the thing is that food doesn't have morality. Food is delicious, it's a part of our life, it's a part of our social life. And so food itself should not be considered good or evil as a blanket statement. There are certain foods that are better and worse for certain people, of course, based on dietary restrictions and bodily chemistry, but in general, food should not be labeled good or evil. The problem is that when we eat too many of the wrong things. So when I worked in an office, the office hosted a lot of training classes and user groups. And so we had a ton of snacks around the office. We had granola bars and potato chips and candy and pop and beer. And it rivaled a convenience store, the assortment of things that we had. And then my job relies a lot on going to happy hours, going to lunches, meeting people over coffee, just being out and about. And so if I'm not careful, my lunch can be, user group pizza and a mini Snickers bar washed down with a Coke Zero. And then for dinner, I might have boneless wings and vodka, which is fine every once in a while, but it's not fine when that becomes your consistent diet every single day. So let's talk about healthy eating at work. Everybody's dietary requirements differ. You need to be aware of what they are, but regardless of those requirements, things can help. I know a lot of people who do this weekend food prep, and they'll Instagram these gorgeous spreads of, meals that they make ahead of time for the week. And that winds up being how they manage to eat healthy. And if that's something that you're inclined to do, that's something that I recommend. For me personally, I don't do a lot of meal prep, but I do always make sure that I have, vegetables and fruits that are washed and ready to grab quickly, and some other healthy snacks. And I also keep those things visible so that when I go to grab a snack, I choose generally the healthier option than I do the potato chips or something that doesn't have a whole lot of nutritional value. I also strive for balance at meals. So if I decide I want to eat pizza for dinner, for lunch I'll have a salad, a hearty salad. It'll have, some protein and stuff in it, but I'll have like a salad or something more vegetable based so that I'm balancing out my diet. And I think it's really important, especially now, especially in a pandemic, especially when we're stuck at home staring at screens all day and all night. I think it's important to eat lunch away from your desk. So the reason I show a Dia D6 here is because when I worked in an office, we would play board games at lunch. In more recent times, that's turned into, there are times when I will meet with my friends on Zoom and we'll play a trivia game, or we'll play Among Us, or something to just get ourselves away from work and take a break. The other thing I've become a big fan of doing is, one of the benefits of working from home, one of the benefits of being remote, is that you can actually take a physical break and leave and maybe go for a walk around your neighborhood. And so that's something I wind up doing at lunchtime too. But I try to not work through lunch. I try to do something that is more fun, more entertaining, and pay attention to my meal and give my brain a little break. So I often go to sleep with great plans to work up at 6 a.m. and work out. When I'm in that morning workout routine, the morning goes one of two ways. I sleep in, I skip the workout, and I have a crappy start to the day. Or I wake up, I suck it up, I do the workout, I hate myself for the first few minutes. I think I'm just being ridiculous for being up so early. But by the time I'm done exercising, I have music going, I have those endorphins flowing, I'm in a good mood, and I'm listening to music, and I'm ready to start the day. And that's really hard to remember if you're trying to wake up at 6 a.m. and work out. And one thing I've learned about myself is that I'm not necessarily wired to work out in the morning. And so I've had to learn some different habits where I no longer force myself to work out in the morning. I'll do it in the mid-afternoon. I'll do it in the evening. I'll do it when I have that energy to do it, rather than forcing myself when I'm not ready. And regardless of whether or not I do a formal workout, I do try to get an activity during the workday. Again, this is even more challenging since we're in COVID and not even really moving around from place to place. So I do some little things to get more physical activity. I am all about my Fitbit. I try to make sure I get my 10,000 steps a day, and that's just the activity level that works for me. And I'm finding that as I've been more consistent about this, I'm actually feeling a lot better. A friend recently invited me to sign up for this 30-day winter walk challenge. And the day it started, we had basically a blizzard in Ohio. And I was like, wow, we picked one heck of a week to start this. But it wound up actually being a really good thing because I still got out most days in the snow. I bundled up. We maybe didn't walk for as long as I wanted to, but I grabbed my two corgis and we went outside and took a walk. And so I did that on a week when the weather was bad. And now these past 2 weeks when the weather's been better, I'm kind of in that habit. I'm motivated and I'm excited to do my walk as part of this 30-day challenge. The other thing I do is I make it a point to, after I get done with a string of meetings, I stand up and I stretch and I move around and I make sure that I'm not sitting in the same position all the time. The other thing I do is I will actually schedule workouts into my calendar and I treat them like any other meeting. Because at the end of the day, a workout is a meeting. It's a meeting and a commitment to yourself. And you owe it to yourself to do some sort of exercise. And that can be, apologies for the dog. Sorry about that. The people across the street from me are moving and the dog was barking. Anyway, I treat my workouts like any other meeting and I try to make this commitment to myself. And I also try to be gentle about it and know that some days I'm just not feeling up to it. And it's okay to skip a day or even 2 days here and there. It's okay to have a day where you maybe don't make the healthier food decisions, a day where you just lay on the couch all day. That's fine. Sometimes we need that rest. The trick is to, more days than not, do these activities and make these dietary decisions. Now, the last part of this that I want to talk about is sleep. And I love this quote. Want to be a morning person? There's an app for that. It's called Alarm, and it's the worst. We, especially in tech, like to brag about how little we sleep. I've seen so many interviews and read so many articles with CEOs and startup founders and architects and developers who talk about how they work 60, 70, 80 hours a week. They only sleep 4 hours a night. And granted, a handful of people can operate on 4 hours of sleep, but most of us cannot. But sleep is often the first thing we sacrifice when we're pressured to get everything done. We figure we can drink some coffee or an energy drink and we'll be fine. And that can be fine for a day or two, but when you're consistently not getting enough sleep, it starts to harm your health because we do physically, biologically need sleep. According to the Department of Health and Human Services here in the US, the positive effects of sleep. It improves our brain function. While we sleep, we actually process and remember information. That's why sometimes you'll go to sleep with a problem or a question on your mind, and you'll wake up in the morning and have figured it out. It's because overnight your brain has processed all of that input. Your body physically heals. Your heart, your blood vessels, and the cells that increase immunity actually heal while we're sleeping and our bodies are resting. Sleep helps balance hormones, specifically those that help control hunger and blood sugar. And it helps us be productive and safe. People who are sleep deprived and driving or operating machinery are actually a risk to people. And the other thing is that sleep deprivation can increase your risk of things like heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, and depression. Now, remember how we were talking about chronic diseases and how many of them are preventable? Sleeping adequately is one of the things that contributes to helping prevent or put off those diseases. So tips for getting better sleep, and this has been admittedly a real struggle. Early in the pandemic, I was working for a company where some of my coworkers were on the West Coast of the United States and some of my coworkers were in Eastern Europe. And so I was working on a team that spanned something like 8 or 10 different time zones, which made it really, really hard to get consistent sleep. And eventually I had to figure out a schedule that worked for me and for my life to make sure I was getting the amount of sleep I need. The common wisdom is to go to bed and wake up at the same time every day. That's great if your schedule is a little bit more consistent, but if not, I think the best solution is just to know how much sleep your body requires and prioritize that. I know that I need about 6 to 7 hours of sleep a night. I also know it takes me a little bit of time to fall asleep, and so I make it a point to go to bed before I need to actually be asleep. We should really avoid bright lights before bed. And for a long, long time, I was really good at this. Before bed, I would color, I would do a Lego kit, I would read on my Kindle, which isn't backlit. I would do something other than look at a lit screen. The reason being that the spectrum of light that's emitted by all of our screens triggers to our brains that we should still be awake. And so this is something that admittedly has lapsed, but in the past little bit, I've started to get back into this habit of toward the end of the night, that TikTok can wait till morning. That text message can wait till morning. Or it's okay to text my friend and say, hey, I'm going to go to sleep. I will chat with you in the morning. And so I'm being more disciplined and kind of guarding my sleep time better than I did. The other thing is limiting coffee, alcohol, and caffeine. Bigger meals later in the day. Coffee, obviously caffeine wakes you back up. And alcohol may help you fall asleep well, but it doesn't help you stay asleep. It cuts how much REM sleep you have. And this is something that I prioritize. It's also important to know yourself and know what prepares you to sleep. So I am, like I said, I'm an extrovert, which means that being around people makes me very hyper. It winds me up. And if I am, for instance, at a conference or visiting family, and I know I need to go to sleep at a certain time, I know I need to be back in my room by myself and have that quiet time in order to basically de-extrovert, I call it, in order to get that energy out. Because as long as I'm talking to people and being around people, I'll just go until I crash. And that's not sustainable. So if we take the time to improve our diet and our exercise and our sleep, just by making these little changes, we can fix some of those career-related problems. We feel more productive. I can say that in the past few weeks, as I have kind of come over this pandemic funk of not maybe taking as good of care of myself as I should have, and started, making healthier food choices again, and started walking again, and started just changing things, my productivity has increased. I'm doing more things, I'm more excited about the things I'm doing, and I'm seeing new opportunities already. My morale is up. I feel more positive, I feel happier, and I know that that influences my team at work. And as a result of being me productive and being somebody who's more pleasant to work around, that will actually increase your professional growth over time, because management will look at things like productivity and morale, as will your team members. But taking care of our physical health is not enough. There's an additional aspect of our health that's often ignored, it's whispered about, there's a lot of stigma around it, and that's mental health. But the thing is that physical and mental health can actually impact each other. And the example that I always think of when it comes to this is stress. So a lot of times we think of stress as a brain thing, like I'm so stressed out, I can't focus, I can't do whatever. And people will tell you, well, don't be so stressed out, just calm down, just chill out. Well, that doesn't work. The thing about stress is it's not just a thought thing, it's not just a brain thing. When we're stressed, our blood pressure goes up, we have issues with our immune system, we can have issues with digestion, blood pressure goes up, moods change, and those are all physical consequences of something that we think a lot of times as mental. Physical issues can increase the risk of mental and relationship problems. I know that when I am sick, physically sick, my depression is worse. They can make things like anxiety or depression worse. And again, like I'm physically sick, my depression is worse. And the problem is then that can lead to relationship problems. You might snap at your partner or your family or just be unplugged and isolate yourself. Mental health issues can increase the risk of physical and relationship problems as well. If you're in a depressive funk or you're feeling very anxious or something, you don't necessarily always make the healthiest choices for yourself physically. Mental health issues affect our behavior and our interactions with other people. According to research by both the Canadian Mental Health Association and the U.S. Institute of National Health, 20% of adults have a mental illness every year. In tech, there is a group called Open Sourcing Mental Illness, or OSME, and OSME does a mental health and tech survey every year. And according to their surveys, it's actually 35% of people in tech struggle with a mental illness or a neurodiversity. And granted, that's a biased sample size, but anecdotally, just from the amount of times I've given this talk and the amount of conversations I've had about it and the things I've seen, that checks out. And so for me, I was diagnosed with ADHD in my mid-20s. My depression and anxiety diagnoses are a few years old only. So I'm speaking from firsthand experience as well as from people around me. The reason I point out this stat is that it's surprisingly more common than you think for somebody to have a mental illness and or a neurodiversity. So what is a mental illness? It affects how we think, how we behave, and how we feel. You can have the same diagnosis with different experiences. The example I really like to go through for this is depression. Some people, when they're depressed, they completely lose their appetite. When some people are depressed, their appetite increases. Things manifest themselves differently. Sometimes when depression manifests itself, you're just very sad, you're very unexcited, you're very kind of flat toward the world. Sometimes it's being curled up in a ball crying, and sometimes it's just being irritated at the littlest things. So you can have the same diagnosis and the same illness, but it's different for everybody. Mental illnesses are caused by a variety of factors. There's genetics and biochemistry, and there's also life events and environment, and those things can feed off of each other. So you might have somebody who is kind of pre-wired toward a certain mental illness, and an event can occur that will trigger that illness to really show itself. And a lot of times it's maybe a traumatic event. The cool thing is that recovery is possible. It's not easy. Recovery is a process. It's not that you start your treatment and you're better and you stay better forever. This is something that I've realized about myself in the past year or so. I had a few years ago been diagnosed with depression, And I started therapy and I started an antidepressant, and it was all working really, really well until large chunks of my life were taken from me. My work travel, being able to go to events, being able to see friends, all of that stuff was taken from me. And so that has caused my mental health to decline a little bit more. And so the past few weeks, I've had a lot of conversations with my doctor and my therapist around this. And they've reminded me that just because you're better or recovered, that doesn't necessarily mean you will stay that way, and that you may need to look into additional treatments or other ways to mitigate this. So that's what we've been doing with me. Talk more about how neglecting your mental health impacts you as a team member. Your productivity is lower. When we get paralyzed with depression, when we're so anxious about the lies our anxious brains are telling us, it's hard to focus, it's hard to follow through on tasks. I make more mistakes when I'm in a place of bad mental health. I just forget to do things and I kind of let people down. It's also lower morale. Somebody who's depressed is not always a pleasant person to be around. And so that lower productivity and that lower morale leads to lower professional growth. Now, I know this slide looks similar to one I showed earlier, and it's because it's the same thing. It's the same impacts that physical and mental health can have on us. And both of those things impact our performance at work and our lives, and they cannot be fully separated. So let's talk about mental illness and possible warning signs of mental illness. Excessive worry is a sign of mental illness. Frequent mood swings, trouble focusing work, trouble doing things, forgetting things. Having trouble communicating. Maybe you and your partner are just snapping at each other for no good reason, and that could be because there's a mental illness that's impacting your ability to communicate. Avoiding social systems. I have a friend who I know when she's really in a depressed state, she just shuts down and avoids everybody. And she and I have an agreement that if I see that, I reach out and check in with her just to say hi and find out if she feels like talking or not. And then we respect that boundary. Changes in biological habits. You might sleep more or less, you might eat more or less, and unfortunately, substance abuse is a warning sign of mental illness. The problem with all of these things is that they're also a part of day-to-day life, especially now. We're all worried, as we've gotten used to working from home, maybe we're used to there's trouble doing work. Communication is way different when it's all done via screens. And so the thing to know is to figure out and know yourself well enough to know when this is situational and it's temporary, or if it becomes a chronic situation where you're constantly worried for no apparent reason, or you're constantly having trouble communicating or something. And so if a majority of these things become true and stay that way, it's a possibility you have a mental illness. So you need to talk to your doctor. So if you think you have a mental illness, or somebody that you love and know has a mental illness, you can get treatment. And here's how it works. First of all, you get the diagnosis. You go to your doctor or doctors and they tell you what's wrong and you get a diagnosis. We're all in tech, we're all probably a little geeky, we want knowledge. And so the next thing you do is you arm yourself with knowledge and you read and learn about what's going on. And you can learn from your doctor, you can learn from internet, you can learn from other people, support groups. There's lots and lots of resources, and we'll touch on some of those in a bit. You might need medication and or therapy. The important thing to remember about both of these things is that neither one of them is an overnight fix. In general, you're looking at 6 to 8 sessions of therapy and 4 to 6 weeks for a medication to kick in. You learn behaviors, you learn coping techniques. So I've had to learn a lot of coping techniques around when the anxiety flares up and I become absolutely convinced that, my dog's going to get hit by a car, even though the dog is safely in the house. There's behaviors that you teach yourself to kind of almost ground yourself and say, no, I can see if the dog is safe. She's in the house. She's over in the living room. She's sleeping on her bed. She's not randomly escaping. And you just use evidence. And that's one way that I help get the anxiety and the anxious behaviors lower. And you need a support system. This is another thing that I'm going to be talking about a lot. And it's something that became very important to me in the last several years. So on the surface, this sounds like something like treating a broken bone. And I always think back to a situation when I was introducing myself, I was talking about how I'd been supporting some coworkers through some health issues. Well, in that case, one coworker had broken her ankle and the other coworker had had a recent depression diagnosis. And the person with the depression diagnosis, he had been open about this and said it was something that he wanted to talk about, as did the woman who broke her ankle. The thing that struck me is that everybody in the office was always happy to ask her how her ankle recovery was doing, how she was healing, how things were going. But almost everybody was afraid to talk to the guy who was dealing with a depression diagnosis because it's hard to talk about and it's not something we're as familiar with. But when you put it in this vein of the treatment process for a broken ankle, where you get knowledge, medication, therapy, we might have to change some behaviors, or the one for depression or any host of other things, is a very similar process. So I know I mentioned there's a stigma around mental illness. Why does the stigma exist? Well, a lot of times it's not visible. So you can look at somebody who's in a wheelchair and assume, even though it's not necessarily the case, you can assume that they have maybe a physical disability, or somebody with only one arm, or somebody walking with a cane. All of those sorts of things are visible disabilities and sometimes visible illnesses and ailments. But when it comes to mental illness, it's not obvious and it's not visible. I am a person who's naturally optimistic and positive. I wear a lot of bright colors. I was recently called Bright Girl in a meeting. I was called Rainbow Girl in a meeting, which was fine. My manager was joking with me, but on the surface, you would never know that somebody who runs around in bright pink clothes all the time, who, has a corgi, who's out, who's social, who's, out walking and whatever, that, wouldn't necessarily assume that somebody like me has depression, when in reality I do. And that's a good example of how this is invisible. There's a lot of fear in the unknown. And this is especially true of those of us who work in tech. We all think about things very logically. We all go into things with this problem-solving mindset. But the problem with mental illnesses is that a lot of times they're not logical and they're not rational, and you can't just explain them away. And they're not something that you can. I get migraines. When I get a migraine, I can take some medication and nap for a couple hours and feel better. But that's not the case with a mental illness. You can't necessarily feel and see that instant recovery. And so it's another thing that makes us afraid of the unknown. Discussing feelings is hard. I get really tired of talking about feelings sometimes, and I do it all the time, and that's part of what I do. But there are times when even somebody who does this a lot gets just tired of talking about emotions. They can be uncomfortable, they can be icky. And so that's another reason there's so much stigma, is it can just be exhausting to talk about this stuff. And unfortunately, some people who have mental illnesses and neurodiversities have been bullied, or they've had other similar problems in their life that might make them want to shut down and hide. When in reality, we need to really work to overcome the stigma. But that stigma exists and it makes us afraid to discuss our mental health. So how do we overcome the stigma? First of all, just understanding. You don't necessarily know why the person next to you isn't their usual bubbly self. Or to go back to the example of the coworker with depression, he was missing stand-ups fairly often. And it was initially perceived as he was just being lazy and had stayed up to playing video games, and he couldn't make it to the stand-up, when in reality, one of the medications he was on was making it extremely hard for him to wake up in the morning, so he adapted to that medication. And so since we knew about that, we could accommodate for that. Talking about it, talking about your own mental illness and checking in with others in struggle. From the outside, it can look like you're successful. You have it all together. I am a person like that. I speak internationally at conferences. I have a great job, great friends, have experienced a lot of things in my life, and that's in spite of all of this mental illness. And I've come to learn over the years, as I've started discussing this stuff more, that a lot of very successful people that I admire and look up to struggle with various mental illnesses and or neurodiversities. And so knowing that helps me normalize it and helps overcome some of the stigma and helps show that you can in fact be successful even with these problems. Listening. This is a really hard one. So sometimes people aren't looking for advice or solutions. And I've really seen this happen with It's especially common, I've seen it with ADHD and with depression, where somebody will, talk about their ADHD and their trouble focusing, and the person will respond, well, just pay better attention. Or somebody who has depression, well, just get up and smile. That's kind of like telling somebody who's in a wheelchair and can't walk, just get up and walk. You can't necessarily solve these problems. And sometimes when somebody wants to talk about their mental illnesses, they simply want to talk, they want to vent, which can be hard for those of us who just go into things with a problem-solving mindset. So one thing I have among my friends and family is when somebody says they're struggling or reaches out, we'll have this kind of agreement where we'll say, hey, are you looking for advice or do you just want to talk? Or say things like, I'm sorry you're dealing with this. If you want to chat about it, let me know. And that way you can help guide the conversation and make sure everybody is consenting to the way that conversation runs. The last piece is cutting down fear. And there is a lot of fear around this. There's fear of impacting relationships and families. There's fear of getting fired or getting trouble at work. There's a lot going on. And so the good thing is that in the United States and Canada and in several other countries, there are actually protections in place for people who have mental illnesses. And in a lot of times, in a lot of places, those mental illnesses are considered disabilities that are protected under things like the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so it's important to educate yourself on your rights and what it is that you need to do to protect yourself within your own country. It's also important to have, appropriate medical, legal, and human resources to help you care for your mental health. It's important to have a support system, and you absolutely should follow the advice that professionals give to you. But day to day, when we're struggling with health issues, it's also good to know there's a whole bunch of different resources available. For purposes of this talk, I'm focusing on some US and Canadian resources, but I know that there are similar initiatives in the UK and in other places. So NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. They do a lot of work around kind of raising awareness and encouraging people to get treatment of their mental illnesses. They have some great resources for discussing and learning about these things. mentalhealth.gov and Mental Health Commission of Canada go more kind of governmental. That's where you can find information about disabilities protections. You can find links to crisis hotlines, all sorts of good information on those websites or the website that works for you in your country. And finally, I know I mentioned OSME, Open Sourcing Mental Illness. Really cool organization. So the story there is that the founder is somebody named Ed Finkler, and he had started talking about his experiences with depression as a front-end developer in the workplace. And over time came to find out he wasn't alone, and a lot of people wanted to talk about this stuff. And so he founded this nonprofit organization that now posts blog posts. They do a mental health survey. They also have some really good books that you can find that are ebooks that deal with employers, employees, and human resources. There's 3 different books, and they all focus on talking about mental illnesses and disabilities and neurodiversities at work. So by taking the time to understand, diagnose, and treat your mental illnesses, you can help fix some of those career-related problems I alluded to earlier. You start to have increased productivity because your brain is now working closer to how it should. Your morale is better because you're feeling better about yourself. You're maybe not worrying about every little thing. You're maybe not crying at your desk every second. And as a result, because you're more productive and you have better morale, you increase your professional growth. Aside from that, there are a lot of other things that you can do. And so I'm going to talk about some of the ways that we can help improve our own mental health at work. And these are all lessons I learned several years ago. So I had a situation several years ago where within the course of 6 months, my husband left, I lost my job, I fractured my rib, I was in a minor car accident, and my dog died in the course of 6 months. I have never been through so much loss in my entire life. And the things that got me through that struggle, the things that got me through my entire life basically falling apart were taking care of myself. They were having fun, and they were my support system and the people around me. And none of these things was a magic bullet. Some days, none of these things actually worked, but for the most part, trying to prioritize these things helped me get through a year-long period there where I basically had to reset and rewrite my whole life because everything was gone. And so self-care it's stuff that you do that's provided to you that nurtures you and adds happiness, relaxation, or kindness to your life. There's two different types of self-care. There's kind self-care and there's reflective self-care. Kind self-care is the stuff that we, will sometimes see memes about, like taking a bubble bath and, sleeping in and indulging in those little indulgences. Maybe even having a glass of wine is a form of self-care for some people. But there's also reflective self-care, and that's stuff like meditation, journaling, prayer, just sitting and thinking about what's going on and taking care of yourself mentally and emotionally. So for me, how does self-care look? I'm posting a picture of a bunch of flowers because something I started doing right around the time my depression started to go downhill and I started losing everything. I had gotten into the habit of keeping fresh cut flowers on my kitchen table all the time. And they don't have to be expensive or fancy. I literally will buy like a $10 or $15 bouquet of flowers from the grocery store every few weeks. But every time I walk past my kitchen table, I see that bright bunch of flowers and it lifts my spirits, maybe just a teeny bit, but it lifts my spirits and it's something little that I can do to just make the environment around me better. You can take time to think, to meditate, to pray if that's your thing, to journal, which is my thing. When I got back into the journaling practice, I had a journal that was called a diary for good and bad days. And it would have you write down things that were bad and then things that had happened throughout the course of the day. And that helped me kind of get in the mindset of acknowledging the bad, acknowledging the good, and getting it out of my brain onto paper. Saying no. Saying no is extremely hard for me. I am somebody who wants to do all of the things, all of the time. And I've had to learn over the years that I can't organize 3 conferences and be writing 4 new talks and do a day job and train for a half marathon and you can't do it all. You can't. You want to, but you can't. And so you really need to think about whether you have the mental capacity and the time to commit to more things. And these days, especially, I'm committing to less and less things. There are so many things I would like to be doing, but between my day job and running a nonprofit scholarship for girls who are pursuing technical degrees, that's called the STIR Scholarship. Between running STIR Scholarship and my day job, I just don't have time to take on any additional projects, and I know that about myself. And I know that in other times, I maybe have more capacity than I do now. And finally, schedule time for yourself on your calendar. I talked to a woman several years ago who said that one of the things she does is every couple weeks she schedules herself a manicure and pedicure. That's something she finds very relaxing, and so she will schedule time to do that. I've known another woman who she likes to play video games, and so she will make time and schedule time on her calendar to play video games. And so schedule time for yourself on your calendar and respect that time, even if it's only 15 or 20 minutes a day. Just take some time to yourself. And ultimately, you'll feel a lot better. I also think it's important to have fun. I think sometimes we forget how important fun is. We're afraid to let go. We're afraid to look silly. We're afraid to give up our responsibilities. But it's important, and it can help us remind us why we exist and how we work. So on this slide, I'm showing a soccer ball or football for those of you not in the US, because I am a big fan of soccer. I actually run a tailgate where in normal years we'll gather in the parking lot outside of the game, and we will have food and we'll laugh and we'll talk together. A lot of us work in tech, so we've termed ourselves the Geek Tailgate. The other thing I like to do is I like to play games. Now playing games is virtual, so maybe it's Jackbox games, maybe it's, remote Dungeons and Dragons, whatever. Just find ways to have fun. Whatever you like to do, it's okay for adults to have fun. This is an ironic sort of way that I enjoy and have fun in life, but I like to travel. I like to see new places. I firmly believe that going on vacations helps you reset yourself, and I think it helps us learn more things as well as remind us why we exist and why we work. And finally, laughter is so very important. It's important to laugh. It's important to have fun. I have a YouTube playlist and a couple Twitter accounts that are my go-tos when I need something to laugh at or giggle at. or TikTok's actually been a good one for this too. I'll scroll through TikTok and find a couple funny things, and it helps just a little bit kind of get me through the day. And all of those things just lead to you being happier. And finally, this is the most important thing. And if you go on my Twitter profile, I have a pinned tweet, and it says, "I'm so lucky to have so many supportive people around me. Thanks for being often. Crew, family, and tech community." Crew is my local Major League Soccer team here in the US. It's my Geek Tailgate friends, and that group of people is some of the closest groups of friends that I have. So when I posted that tweet right when I was in the midst of all of that year that was a bad country song where, I lost my job and my husband and my dog, and it was just a rough year. And I do not think I would have gotten through it had I not had friends and people to talk to about it. And in addition to just having people to talk to or listen, those people also helped me stay accountable. So a couple of those people would check in on me as I was going through treatment and ask, "Hey, did you go to therapy tonight? Did you get enough sleep?" And I had asked those people to check in on me. But at some point, we all just knew each other well enough that we check in on one another. Even now, there's a lot of texting and checking on each other periodically. And if we are trying to set goals or do certain accountability things, relationships help with that. Your relationships are your support in tough times. Much like that year of loss in the past year, I think that my friends have gotten me through this more than anything. And a lot of those friends are friends I've made either through conferences in the tech community or through running my soccer tailgate. But we get together, we commiserate, we laugh, we share our experiences, and it helps us feel a little bit less alone. And it helps us get through the really hard times. And right now, we need that support more than ever. And when this is all over and COVID is over and we can go back into the real world, your friends are there for celebration. Even now, your friends can help with celebration. When I accepted my job at Quicken Loans, it was a company I wanted to work for a while, and I'd wanted a tech community manager role for a while. And so one of the first groups that knew about it was my closest group of tech community friends and my closest group of soccer friends. And we all could celebrate that, even if, obviously couldn't do it in person, but there was a lot of just, congratulatory messages and talking excitedly with each other. And I also think it's important for you to have friends at work. So we talk about health. I think in general, we need to have more transparency. We need to have more empathy. And the more we make it okay to talk about these things, and the more we discuss these things, and the more we prioritize these things, the easier it is for everyone. The thing to remember is that sometimes in those discussions, advice isn't the answer. People aren't always looking for a fix. Sometimes they're just looking for somebody to listen and empathize with them. And so listening and answering can be a solution. The thing is that nobody exists in a bubble. We're all parts of teams. We're all parts of family, however you define that, whether by blood or friendship. We're all parts of social circles. We're all surrounded by people, and our physical and mental health affects our family, our friends, and our coworkers. So I just want to leave this saying, don't be afraid to take care of your own health. Be especially gentle with yourself right now as we're dealing with this environment where we're not always sure if it's safe to go to the grocery store, where, there's been some other challenges, basically everything that was hashtag 2020, all of that stuff, we need to be gentle with ourselves. And so am I frustrated that I gained some weight over the past year and that my, I fell out of some of those healthy habits? Yes. Am I also forgiving of myself because I know that we're dealing with this unprecedented time and this struggle? Also, yes. And so it's important to just take care of yourself, have these conversations, and the end result of this is actually going to be a happier and healthier and more productive tech community. I'd like to thank you for your time. You can find me on Twitter at Cassandra Faris. Gmail is cassandrafaris@gmail.com. Again, I'm a tech community manager at Rocket Mortgage, and those two adorable dogs are my corgis. Katie is the tricolor, and Pippin is my supervisor. He's the fawn-colored dog. Didn't talk about it a lot, but I feel like dogs also are helping me get through these hard times. So thank you for your time. I'm glad I've been a part of this, and please feel free to reach out to me via Twitter. My DMs are open, or via email if you'd like to talk about any of this stuff, or if you have any questions. I'm always happy to talk about this. It's very important to me, and it's one of my passion topics and the most important causes I deal with. So again, thank you for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.